there has to be evidence before a policy is developed. And this is one of the reasons why I'm doing this presentation, to see how researchers back home, back in Nigeria, can actually collaborate better with policymakers and drive policy change through their research. It also, one of the reasons is also that it promotes innovation. He had introduced me that I innovated a system, which I'll talk a bit about later in my presentation. And it also improves, public trust in research, in the research council, and also governance, and of course, global competitiveness. We know that the world is a global village right now. Climate change and sustainable development is not isolated to one part of the world. It is everybody's problem. And for us to, to be able to have that competitive advantage, we need to produce research that are local, that will solve our local problems, and also be able to be globally competitive. And of course, to be able to collaborate, a partnership with policymakers and researchers. And so now I haven't talked about the reasons why there's need for us to have policy-driven research. But there are gaps, there are global gaps. It's not only in Africa that we have those problems. There are global research policy gaps. Most of the time, the major problem is the timeline. There's usually this discrepancy between the policy development timeline and research cycles. For a lot of us, I don't know how many researchers are here. I think that we have a vast, a dynamic demographic here. So like you find out that for researchers, people that are, very conversant with research, you find out that research cycles are based on funding. And your research, the research cycle might not, fit into the policy development process or the policy discussion that goes on at the policy space. And this is also one of the challenges. And I'll talk about how we can, overcome some of these challenges later, how I try to overcome some of the challenges later. Also, our objectives are different. From my experience, I find out that there is a huge gap between our pursuit of knowledge as researchers and the practical solutions to real world problems. A lot of research they add value to knowledge, but sometimes they can be quite abstract, that you begin to think, and they're quite complex. I begin to think, how do we translate this research into practical solutions to real world problems? I would also discuss how I was able to do mine. And also research complexity. As I'd mentioned that, the inability for researchers to simplify complex research, to make it actionable to policymakers. From my experience, when you speak with policymakers, they are not really interested in the verbals or the jargons or the research jargons that you have to talk about. They want to know in the simplest form how your research can benefit the community, how your research can benefit their own political will, and how your research can benefit policy development. And also the fact that there is this gap between, researchers' engagement with policymakers. A lot of us are so stuck in the lab that we don't, and we only just present our research in academic conferences, and we publish papers. A lot of us can publish papers. Those things are really good. But at the end of the day, if we want to drive change in Africa, we have to learn, or we have to begin to engage more with policymakers at different levels, at various levels. In Africa, particularly, we have a peculiar problem, and we have peculiar problems, and our major challenges are peculiar to Africa from my experience and from research. First of all, the major challenge is research funding. In Africa, there is limited research funding. In Nigeria, so I know a lot of the universities, the research, they are not as funded as universities in the UK and in the Western world. That's also a challenge. Even in the UK, if you're doing a research that is Africa-based, there is this barrier that you would not probably get as much fund as you want, to be able to carry out the research, because every country wants to, research that will benefit their own local community. The second thing is also, I talked about that, the disconnect between, researchers and policymakers, and the communication barriers. And just the fact that when I talk about communication barriers, is as if a lot of researchers in Africa do not really know the right strategy to communicate their research. I'll talk a bit about some of the strategies that I used and best practice that have been that I've used and others have used to achieve or to break these barriers. Also, we have the challenge of weak policy framework, timing issues. I've spoken about that, and also there is a huge dependence on external research here, that we depend a lot on or a lot on external research. I know that for a lot of researchers that are here, one of the challenges that we have is getting data. And if we don't do research that is home based, or if we don't do research that would solve our own issues, there is no how we get data to keep improving on research that we have done. And also there's the lack of political will with our politicians. That is almost beyond our own control. But there are strategies that which you can just increase the political will, which I'll also talk about later. And also the brain drain. A lot of the intelligent and people that are quite ambitious with research and want to make a change, most of them are migrating from Nigeria and from Africa to other nations, not necessarily because they want to, but because it has a more enabling environment to promote their research endeavors and to also make them have more impact in the society. And I will just talk about, strategies to bridge this gap. I talked about, the different things. Majorly, I think that for every researcher, I would say that communicating your research to different kinds of forum is so important. I remember that when I wanted to present here, I asked Dr. Shoguda, what's the demograph of the people that would be coming? It's so important so that you would know the level or how to communicate, but for to be able to communicate, for example, to be able to communicate with policymakers, there's what we call, policy briefs, infographics that are like really useful for them. Then there are blogs, different blogs that are in policy spaces, online policy spaces that you can write, and also presentations at different forums. And also build partnership, leverage on your network, build partnership, engage with policymakers early, collaborate with stakeholders. You might say, oh, you don't know any policy maker, or you don't know any of the politicians. A good way to go about this is to collaborate with NGOs and development agencies with the mind that you want to drive policy change. And it's really interesting because we're in the built environment. The built environment is an environment where it's so easy with our research to drive sustainable development, because it's a very practical sector. It's very practicable to be able to drive sustainable development if we are in the built environment. And also, you leverage on social media, your conferences, even the international conferences. I'll tell you the strategies that I used, even when I went for academic conferences, how my target was policymakers, even in my research. And I would want to mention that my research in itself is not policy based. But because I wanted to drive policy change, I tailored my engagement towards policy development and towards engaging with policymakers, as well as the academic drive of publishing papers and speaking at academic conferences. And also, another way to to bridge this gap is to develop policy frameworks and increase the local funding stream. This is talking to the people, the policymakers. I think those, but a way that researchers can be able to get more local funding stream is to collaborate, international collaboration. Now there are a lot of funding streams that are available in the space, and most times most of them want local based collaborators. Like even if the funding is from UK, for example, they want a collaborator from Nigeria or from an African country. So you can leverage on all this to be able to tailor to African unique challenges. I remember a grant that a group of Nigerians back here, we applied for. It was, we decided that we were just going to be Nigerians that would apply for it, because we were all passionate about, driving change back home. And we had to find, a university or and also a contractor, back home to be able to collaborate with us. So these are like streams that are really helpful. And I want to encourage, researchers to do more of this. And now let me just talk a bit about my research. Then I'll tell you how I use some of those strategies to drive policy change, despite that my research was not policy based. So my research, basically, what drove me to conduct this research was the fact that, when I was practicing back in Nigeria, one of the challenges that I faced was, the challenge of indoor cooling, which was what drove me to actually, become an expert in energy efficient building designs, is the cooling of the indoor space. And I know that a lot of buildings, we kind of almost imitate buildings that are in foreign countries, not considering the climate of our environment. So this kind of drove me to say, you know what, I would like to solve the problem of this indoor cooling. And I found out that, based on research, that only 5.6% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa have access to any form of indoor cooling at all. So, having said that, and a lot of people in Africa are low income earners. We have about 2.3 million deaths that are even connected, to indoor ventilation. That's globally about 4% of the global deaths. That's only in Africa. And about like the buildings now, the major problem that I found out was that, buildings, particularly residential buildings, the ones that use AC, air conditioners, they actually consume about between 35 and 42% more energy than those that are without air conditioners. And being a sustainable enthusiast, I started thinking about what kind of system or what kind of mitigation can I, carry out without the need to use air conditioners. And this drove me to find out about a system called wind catcher, which has been used in ancient. It has been used in ancient Egypt or ancient Iran and the Middle East. So the wind catcher is been there for a while, but that was what motivated me to, design this novel system. So what I've done is that there is the wind catcher. This innovation consists of three major elements. So that's the wind catcher itself, which is, I would explain how it works, and material called phase change material, and also the introduction of a solar fan. And yeah, so the introduction of a solar fan. These three were uniquely put together, and the system was developed. Now the concept is that it works based on stack effects. For architects here, you would know what I mean by stack effect. It works based on stack and buoyancy effect. So it drives its airflow by itself based on the temperature difference and the air pressure difference, and drives it out. But as the airflow goes into the system, the phase change material absorbs the heat the heat from the incoming air, and lowers the temperature of the air that goes into the space. So, but what makes this innovation unique um, is the unique arrangement of the PCM tubes. They're in tubes. Is the unique arrangement of the PCM tubes. I don't want to go too much into details of the system because it's undergoing patent at the moment. So for example, the part of what we were able to the results that I got from this system is it's the energy consumption is way, way, way less than the air conditioners, almost about 70% less, about 18.7 times less energy than an air conditioning system of the same cooling capacity. And also the air temperature was being able to reduce to, I think this figure is even wrong, it's between 4 and 5 degrees. Let's say between 4 degrees to 5 degrees maximum for a duration of 7 hours. So when the project was done, I analyzed the weather data, and based on the weather data, the active the hot period of a, I mean, the hot period of, let's say I used Abuja as my case study, was between 12 noon to about 6 p.m. So within that time frame, this system can actually reduce the temperature, and it now recharges itself at night. The research method, scientifically, I won't go too much into the scientific research method that I used, because that's not really the main objective of this presentation. But I just want to say that they were just, it was basically based on CFD, that's computational fluid dynamics, which calculated the heat transfer rate, the energy dissipation, and also the turbulent airflow. So there were three major objectives that I wanted to achieve from this research. The first one was to investigate, the ventilation performance, the cooling performance, and also the thermal storage performance, because phase change material has an ability to actually store heat. Is a thermal energy storage material to store it. And based on that, I used computational fluid dynamics to investigate it, and also validated the model and did an economic analysis. So how is this relevant? Remember that I said that my research in itself I didn't do a research in policy. But how is my research relevant to policy? And this is where it gets interesting. Maybe you might have a question. So I'm investigating a research and it does not, I'm not doing a research in policy. You don't necessarily have to do a research in policy, but you have to ensure that you find a niche in your research that aligns with sustainable development. So for example, my research aligns with sustainable development, affordable clean energy, industry innovation and infrastructure, reducing inequality. Remember that I said that I want to bridge that gap of the people that don't have cooling in their buildings, and also sustainable cities and communities, because it reduces carbon emission and makes our cities cleaner. And the data from this, from my innovation, or from my research, I've actually been able to drive building regulations. And I'll talk to you about one impact that I made through my research knowledge at the University of Nottingham, and also to drive to reduce carbon emission in low income housing, and also policy innovation for local context relevance. Those are like the main things that my research, the relevance of this research in policy. And so that now the strategies that I adopted to influence policy. First of all, when I started my research, I had no idea how I was going to, translate, my research into policy development. So I took on a training at the University of Nottingham. It's called Get Engaged with Policy Program. And that opened my eyes to strategies that I would be able to, to be able to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. So some of the things that I learned was that, first of all, I understood, the policy and the political context, and how to promote my research at an international level, and particularly to policymakers. And I also learned, how to articulate the value of my research to government through policy brief. I'll talk a bit about, the strategies on developing a policy brief. And also, to understand the roles of influencers, politicians, decision makers, and other stakeholders, and to leverage the buy-in of these groups of people to be able to drive evidence-based policy development. And also, I learned, how to develop a policy brief. Now, developing a policy brief is totally different from writing an article, or writing a blog, or writing a conference paper, or writing a journal paper. It is highly different. Because politicians or policymakers, they don't have the patience, to read all the jargons, all the research jargons, and they don't want to even know the method that you're using. They just want to know the impact it would make, and the duration of the impact, and the key element, the key message, which I'll talk about in my next slide. And also how I was, one of the things I also learned was that how to take advantage of both informal gatherings, both formal gatherings, both academic conferences, and every other kind of space to impact and lobby policymakers. So now this is a sample of my own policy brief that I developed. So the main this is not the published one, this is just like a draft. So the main elements of this policy brief are just basically, first of all, I think I'd like the first thing is that who is it aimed at? You have to identify who is aimed at. You have to make your problem very clear and your key message. And for the key message, it's always nice to highlight it and so that even if they cannot read the entire policy brief, that key message will be what will stay with them. And also, more like you can, if you have a quote, you can pull out a quote out of it and outline the problem clearly. And now you talk about your evidence. What evidence you have based on your research? What results have you been able to achieve based on your research? What problem, and also the results and the evidence? It is based on this evidence, and this evidence part is very key. Is this evidence that would actually drive policy change? And you have to talk about your recommendation. What are you recommending to the government, and your conclusion? And of course, you have your references. So these are just tidbits of writing a good policy brief. You can see a lot of policy briefs online and just write. And why would you say that? Why is a policy brief necessary? There are different online platforms. Even if you have not met any policymaker, there are different online platforms. Maybe if you connect with me later, I can share some of these links. There are different online platforms whereby you can write policy brief about your research and just post it there. You can write blogs about your research and post it, but it's not just posting it to any kind of forum. There are policy domains that that would get attracted. I think, for example, you can approach the National Assembly in Nigeria, for example. They should have a website, and approach them to, I don't know how things work now, but to say, you have this and you'd like to publish or write a blog on their website. I think that shouldn't be, I don't know how but in the UK, this is possible to be able to write blogs in some of those websites. In fact, I've written blogs for a lot of companies that are into sustainable development, in the sustainable development sector. I've also, written reports. My blogs have been published in some of these policy spaces. And so, talking about the strategies that I adopted to influence policy, I used very informal spaces, and also I was just I ensure that at every space where I present or where I was invited to, I would want to talk about my research. I would maybe write an email to say, you know what, can you give me an opportunity to present my research? So far, I know that there are policymakers in that space. And I've been lucky, it's been granted. I've had, those granted a few times, and you can see some of the examples. I think one of the highlights for me during my research was me being able to present my research at a Commonwealth Education Ministers Action Group meeting, where the former Secretary General of the Commonwealth was there. And based on my research, that what I presented, they actually, started they said, oh, it's important for researchers, young researchers, to be part of this, to be part of the working group for the next meeting. So that kind of created opportunities for young people like me to be able to, contribute towards policy development in that space, which I think was a good win. Although it wasn't like particularly my research was adopted, but based on the research, my presentation, they saw a need for researchers, for young researchers and young scholars to be involved in process. And so on. And so I've presented also, I had opportunity to talk to UK parliamentarians, UK councillors, and high commissioners. I will show you some of the photos and some of the things that I got out of that, and also government officials talking about policy development, evidence-based policy development. One one contribution that I think I am proud of is being able to contribute to the Nigerian Energy Efficiency in Buildings Training Manual. That I was approached during my PhD to be part of the contributors to what's that word? To revise, yes, to revise the manual and also to train professionals based on my expertise. And I mentioned that I've written a few blogs. Then when I go for conferences, even when I have oral presentation, I always like to do posters. But my posters were majorly I would target policymakers using infographics, um, and I mean to present, how the impact, my research would have on policy. And my target mainly were policymakers and maybe investors too, investors and relevant stakeholders. So that was one of the things that I also did. This is just some photos. Photos never lie. Just some photos. I've been talking a lot about, some of the interventions that I've tried to do and some of the spaces that I've been in to present, to try to um, kind of influenced policy development through my research. And for example, if you look at the Campus Development Advisory Group, I received an email that a new campus was going to be developed. And I went to visit the campus and I saw that, okay, I can actually, inform policy development in terms of, the space arrangement, in terms of the ventilation, in terms of, because you remember that my system also has the ventilation aspect. So, and I approached them and I was put on board, and my advice, my expertise was actually shaped the way the campus was redesigned. It's still ongoing. I'm still a part of the group, and we still, give feedback here and there. They've shared with us, even the designs of the buildings that will be there, just seeking our expertise to contribute to that policy development. And that is always, transferred to the University Senate for approval. So also I talked about, being able to present my research at the Policymakers Forum at the Commonwealth Secretariat in London. And also, um, one thing was that we've been, like myself and other scholars, we've been to the Nigerian High Commission in London a few times, and what we have been trying to drive to the Nigerian government is to encourage and to encourage research, evidence-based policy development, to say that, what, we are doing this research, we can contribute to the development of policies in Nigeria, we can contribute to sustainable development in Nigeria. And we've been having that conversation with the Nigerian High Commission over the years. I think we've been since 4 years now. We've been having those consistent conversations. And I think I'll just mention that the drive for policy change, you need patience because you need the political will. I remember the first time that I spoke with one of the governors when I was talking to him about my research, to say, what, this can actually improve the building regulation in Nigeria and can also be an avenue. He didn't even believe me. He didn't believe me. And initially I felt, disappointed. But, I remember that, sometimes some intervention you want to introduce may not be in line or in sync with their political will at that time. So that's also something you have to consider. What strategy do I have to make to ensure that, they listen to me, to ensure that, they have a buy-in? And also, most people take you seriously when you have evidence, when you have been able to achieve some feats in the domain. If you and this one makes it a little bit difficult for early researchers to be able to penetrate that. These are just other examples of discussion. So, like, some of the successes, and I would also talk about the challenges that I faced in transferring my research into policy development space. I had the possibility of developing pilot schemes. I actually had people that were interested in, saying that, what, let's develop some pilot schemes, not even in Nigeria, in some other countries, to say like that, to partner with the government. And we are still, these discussions are still ongoing. I say it takes a while, they are still ongoing. And also the influence of, stakeholder adoption for best practice. I talked about how that happened with the Commonwealth ministers meeting, and also the opportunity to apply for grants with partnerships with different organizations. So if people know that your research drives positive change, that the evidence that they can see, people would want to, partner with you. Organizations will want to partner with you, even if your research has not gotten to that level of, what's that word, to that level of, to a final point. Because when I was having these discussions, it was early on in my research. I had not even concluded my PhD, but people would be interested to say, oh, this has potential. Let's, collaborate together and apply for grants. And you also receive, recognition for your impactful research. So my message today, or now, before I talk about my message, some of the challenges that I also faced, I talked about the lack of political will, policymakers' resistance to change, especially in Nigeria. I discovered that, in fact, even in the UK too, there is that if it's not in line with their manifesto, it's very difficult to be able to find to be able to create that niche. But one way you can actually penetrate that is to actually find the policymaker that aligns best with your kind of research. For example, for sustainable development, who are the stakeholders in that domain, the organizations in that domain, the NGOs in that domain. You can start with the NGOs and collaborate with them, and also MDAs, the MDAs in the domain. I know currently we are working, myself and a group of other researchers, we are working with one of the MDAs in Nigeria. I would not mention their name now, and we're working on blue-green cities. So it's an interdisciplinary group where we are trying to apply for a grant, and each one has, different expertise. First of all, I need to mention that for sustainable development, you cannot, because sustainable development is such a complex problem, or it's such a complex it's something that you can use to solve a lot of complex world problems. And now the world problem is so complex. You cannot solve world problems by just a linear solution. You need to collaborate with different disciplines, and you need to, like, come to use like the integrated approach to be able to solve your problem, and that would take you a long way. And it also, I found out that in the course of my research, because I had challenges with funding to get my innovation to that level where to that level where, I would be very confident that, this can go into the market. So I discovered that, there's still need for me to do some pilot scheme development to be able to, get to that point. And also I talked about the time frame misalignment. I remember there was a time I was talking to a high commissioner, to the high commissioner to is it to Nigeria or to Africa? The high commissioner to Africa. We're having very good conversation, and we're already working towards something. And the next thing, they had, they had changed her. She had moved from that office, and somebody else was there. So imagine, I didn't even know the new person. So it was really difficult for me to continue that conversation in that direction. So sometimes this time frame misalignment was one major factor that I had, which was a challenge for me. And I talked about the resource constraint. So now, what are the lessons from what I have learned, the lessons that I can bring out for early career researchers like me? First of all, I would say, please engage early with policymakers, even from your first year, or even if you're in your postdoc or you've just started your research career. If you're, investigating or doing research in a domain, start seeking out policymakers, start seeking out NGOs and organizations and stakeholders early on, and let them begin to contribute to your research. let them begin to contribute through questionnaires, through engagement, just let them contribute to your research so that they feel invested in the research anyway. And that helps you to also realign your research to real world needs. And also simplify your findings. One way to simplify your findings, especially in terms of communicating complex research to non-experts, non-specialist audience. I've talked about blogs. Try writing blogs. Try policy briefs. Try to write reports that are not research based per se, but you're implementing your research expertise in those reports. That would help you to communicate better. And also, do not only attend academic conferences, also attend conferences that are not academic but maybe policy based. That would help you to be able to transfer your knowledge, and people would ask questions, and it would even help you to know if your research is understandable to solve real world needs. And also you focus on relevance. I had said that a lot of researchers, it's not like the research is not relevant. They are relevant, but most times when we do research, our main aim is we want to write journals, we want to publish, which in itself is not bad. But I think that one of the main reasons, that's for me, my mantra is that if I'm going to do a research, then it must solve world issues. It must really make an impact. If we have that at the back of our mind, things will, the way you shape your research, even if it's not conclusive, because I know research time frame can be really short, at least you would have taken your research to a certain level where somebody else can pick it up from there and take it. And this is how we drive change in the sector. And be proactive in outreach. I talked about, I seek opportunities, be proactive, send emails out, any contact, leverage on your existing network and just be proactive. I talked about how I try to leverage on my existing network and to present in policy forums, conferences. I've even, been part of, panel discussants in conferences that they've talked about sustainable development, and I emphasize the research and what I'm doing and how that can, influence sustainable development. But those forums were not necessarily in line with, my academic pursuits. But, remember that you have to balance things. If you're probably like a PhD student, you have to ensure that you present in places where, of course, would benefit your academic pursuits. But at the same time, you need to also, include all these other forums. Collaborate across disciplines. I talked about that. That is really, really important. That has really, really, boosted my career, being able to collaborate with other professionals to broaden my impact. And you see that they bring in, different perspective to your research. And also you can create something, even better if you collaborate with others. And also be patient and persistent. It takes a long time to drive policy change. It takes a long time. It takes a long time. I'm still in the process, still in the process. And I've had a few wins, but so many losses, so many failures too. So it takes a long time. You have to be patient. You have to be persistent. Once people see that you're persistent in your pursuit, then they begin to take you more seriously. And just when and you keep talking about your research, keep speaking to people about your research and how the impact it will make in to Africa and to Nigeria, if people that are in Nigeria and all, then document your impact, track how your research contributes to policy and societal outcomes to demonstrate its value. Like what I've done now, I have been trying to keep track. I have most times when I attend maybe like a training or like a conference, I approach them that I want to write a blog, and I write the blog. And the strategy is that it's not because I'm jobless. No, it's because I want to use those opportunities to document the impact and also talk about my research in those forums, whether it is my research related, whether it's related to my research or not. Those are, strategies that I have used, and I'm encouraging everyone to jump on that boat too. And call to action. This is my last point. So the call to action is, I want us to, let us transform knowledge into policy action for a sustainable Africa. Remember, every researcher should have a policy entrepreneurship mindset. When I talk about having a policy entrepreneurship mindset, it means that take ownership of your research towards policy and don't just isolate your research without having that impact with policy. And that's where I would end today. If you want to contact me, I'm sorry, I should have added the link to my blogs and my publications. Maybe I can send a list to Dr. Shogo if he's interested. Whoever is interested, you can read more about my research and some of the blogs that I've written. And if you want to connect with me, just I have my contacts here. And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Olamide. That was a very interesting lecture, and we appreciate you for the time to deliver this interesting lecture. So just a form of recap for the benefit of those that joined late. I will do a quick recap of the major highlights of our presentation, and then we'll welcome questions from the floor. So our presenter did a quick presentation on the topic, which is bridging the gap between academic research and policy. And then the major highlights were she explained why research should drive policy. She also told us about the gaps between research and policy, which led her into the challenges of engaging policymakers to ensure that our research get the impact that is needed. She also talked about the strategies with which we can bridge the gap between research and policy. And then she also discussed a bit about PhD research work, where she had developed an instrument to improve the indoor cooling of building spaces. She is an energy expert, and so she was able to make a PhD work to be relevant in the space of indoor cooling for buildings. And so it's been an interesting session with our guest speaker, Dr. Olamide. We appreciate you once again for the presentation. And so if there is anyone on the floor that has any question for our speaker, it's time for question and answer. Are there any questions from anybody? If you have any question, you can raise your hand up. I would acknowledge you and allow you to speak. To address it could be a question, it could be an input, it could be, a contribution. Question. While we wait, I'll just talk a little bit about some of the points regarding the challenges. She talked about the fact of the lack of political will, which of course we know is something that is predominant in our context in Africa. She also said that that's also a similar challenge even in the UK. So it's not only peculiar to this space. She also talked about the resource constraints in terms of funding and how we can be intentional in attracting funding, trying to leverage on our networks and the likes, being intentional, making use of both formal and informal gatherings to engage with people. And of course, the time frame misalignment was something she'd also discussed. Okay, any question? Any question? I'm waiting. That's why I'm just doing this recap. Okay, Ejiro Ikoko, I can see your hand up. Ejiro Ikoko, you can speak.
Hi, thank you. I can see she's smiling. Hi.
Hello, Ejiro.
Well, you look great, by the way.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Well done. So I just want to ask this for the purpose of people that are aspiring to do a PhD or people actually doing one. From what you said, you did a lot. Policy, your research, your PhD. So how did you strike that balance?
Yeah.
That's the issue. Kind of people who need that advice. And number two, you also mentioned you had some wins and you have a lot of failures. Now, one thing is people get depressed and do not finish their journey, whether it's the policy chase or the research chase, whatever it is. What kind of advice would you give them? How did you carry on to finish this journey despite the downtime and the disappointment? And Just sorry, this last question, because you said how to link your research to policy. If I didn't miss that part, because I joined quite not at the beginning. Is there a way to let people know, or what advice you give them to know how their research can be relevant to policy? I know you mentioned the SDG goals, but is there other ways for them to know how to do research that are relevant to policy? Because it's not just an issue; it's also an issue in. When I was in Kenya, I was with the World Bank Committee. It's also an issue. People saying research in academic is not relevant to industry. So it's actually an issue. So is there any advice? Okay, bye.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adrian. Should I answer, Dr. Sugar, or just list out all the
Yes.
questions?
No, I think you can go ahead to answer that while we wait for more questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ejiro. I think your first question, you said, how did I balance between my research and my drive for policy? I would say the first thing that I would say was that I had a very strong passion, which would also require, a lot of hard work. I would say that I think time management is really crucial. Time management is really crucial. I had set goals that I would want to achieve in my academic pursuits, because the drive for policy was more like an additional work that I gave myself, because I wanted to finish my PhD with a drive that it actually has made some impact or will make some impact. So I needed to add value to the knowledge that I already had towards my academic pursuit of my PhD, alongside with, adding more knowledge in terms of the policy in this policy space. So I would say how I was able to balance it was, I wouldn't say it was easy. No, it wasn't easy, but it was a lot of hard work. But I think one of the things that really helped me was my network. My network really helped me. I think I have very positive people around me that are also driven, and that, sometimes when you're discouraged, you can, have that discussion with, people around you, and because you see their drive. Now, I would say that I'm a Commonwealth scholar, and most of the scholars that I know, they have the kind of drive that I have towards sustainable development. So sometimes when you reach like a block or like a kind of resistance, you have people of like minds that you can talk to, and they, we share strategies, way forward, they share links, network. It's really a very, very powerful network. The Commonwealth scholars it's a very powerful network that we kind of help each other. That has really helped me. And in terms of balancing, I would say time management is really key. For everyone that has gone through a PhD, it's not a small feat. It's really, really draining. But you need to balance things and just work on your time management. I would say that's how I was able to balance time management and my network. Then you said, the question was that, what advice can I give people to be able to do research that are relevant? I would say that I would advise people that have not done a PhD to say that, you know what, first of all, research on real life problems. There's no point in doing a research that will not be relevant. And I want to encourage, this is my encouragement. I know a lot of people, they want to go abroad, to do their PhD. Some people like even want to remain in Nigeria, but like their dream is to go abroad. Can we invest our brain knowledge, even if we are overseas, to invest in driving change in Africa? Because I found out that in the West, they focus so much on developing their own, they keep, they keep developing their sector, keep improving. But sometimes I think it does not, this is my own personal, and please, no offense to anyone, but this is my own personal opinion. I feel like if you're an African, you should do a research that is African related, because there's nobody that would build your continent for you. And for people that are in this space, you find out that it's so difficult to get data. It's so difficult to get data. And the reason why it's difficult to get data is because either the people that have done research have not done quality research, or the people that have done research don't have the financial capability to publish their research, for example, or to present their research in conferences. Maybe this might be a plea to universities in Nigeria, like the Caleb University, to have a data bank where people can, share resources and, you know, share data, and that way, can also help PhDs or aspiring PhD students to, go into that bank and see the gaps that are still needs to be filled, that need real life solutions. And I said that's the advice that I can give to people that want to do research. The third question I think you asked, I can't remember the third question now. Dr. Shugo, I think she asked
Yeah,
about
she asked about how to balance how intending PhD students can balance the PhD studies and their work life. I think that's the last question which you haven't answered.
Yeah.
If I'm
So
right.
yeah, I think I even answered.
It,
Okay, how to, yes. Hey, Joe, do you want to ask the question, the last
yeah,
question?
so I think you already answered it. So the first one's about balancing. Second one's about how you kept moving on despite disappointment, which you talked about your network. And third one's research. So you already answered three of them.
The three of them. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ejiro. Thank you, Dr. Shigumi.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Any other question from the floor before we move to the next agenda? Any question from anybody before we move ahead? Just give a few more. Okay. Okay, Ogochukwu Aguyi is raising her hand. You can go ahead to speak, Ogochukwu. Do you want to ask a question? I can
Yes, I would like
see.
to ask a question, sir.
All right, go ahead, please.
Good day, ma. I really
Hello.
enjoyed your seminar. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
My question is, what are the challenges associated with integrating phase-changing materials into existing buildings? Like, because the way I see phase-changing materials, they can interact with different building materials at different temperatures. So what are the challenges you faced with phase-changing materials on existing buildings, like integrating it in existing buildings, not new buildings?
Yeah. Thank you very much. That's a very, very interesting question. So you want me to go into my research now. So let me just talk a bit about the challenges that, of course, there are challenges using phase change material. But one of the challenges with using phase change material, if you've done research in phase change material, is the thermal conductivity. In terms of, it has very low thermal conductivity, and research already shows that by doing encapsulating the material, or micro encapsulation, can actually improve the thermal conductivity of these materials. So that was one of the challenges that I had, which I tried to solve. The second challenge is, of course, that temperature, there is I mean, if there's temperature variation in the normal climate. So if you have temperature variation, so now how I was able to solve that was to first of all determine the adaptive comfort of my space. And ASHRAE standard talks about the adaptive comfort of, say, like 25 degrees to 27 degrees. But for adaptive comfort, if the temperature outside is, say, like higher, there is that range of, say, like +2 degrees Celsius that you can include. Now, you know that phase change material, they have a melting temperature range, which you know. And what would happen is that there are two ways to go about it. Either you use different phase change materials of different temperature ranges, or you use one phase change material with a wide temperature range. That's so that means that if for example, I used the paraffin wax. I used paraffin wax of melting temperature of between 27 and 28. So that did not it didn't solve all the problem. It's still a problem that, in research, we are still trying to solve, which is true. We are still trying to solve it. But you have to determine the phase change. I think what really makes a phase change material effective is if you can really choose the right melting temperature, the right melting temperature range. And there are research that have shown that, you can actually improve on the performance if you use more than one temperature, if you use more than one type of phase change material. Although in my research, that was not what I did, because it was getting very complicated. So I only just restricted myself to one one melting temperature phase change material that had a wide melting temperature. So that solved the problem. And that's why when I was mentioning it, I said that it could sustain the temperature for only about 7 hours. So it's a win. You have to be able to know how you want to your how would I put it now, your wins and what you're able to get away with. So that's all I can say about it. I mean, it's still I think phase change material, the domain, there's still a lot of research that needs to be done in the domain, but it has great potential. Yes. I don't know, did I answer your question, Ugochu?
Yes, you did answer my question. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, thank you so much for that. I would also acknowledge Professor Oluwole Alagbe. I think his hand is up. And then after Professor Alagbe, Gati Gasua will ask his question. And then Esther Adebayo, and then we'll call it a day on question and answer session. Professor.
All right, thank you very much. I think let me yield the floor first for Kasua because she raised her hand before me.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay, all right. Kasua.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Olamide. You look amazing, and the presentation was spot on. I've learned a lot, from just your presentation. I want to ask you a question. You've talked about collaboration, and if there's any student maybe in the remotest part of Africa who is maybe planning to do a PhD or research, how did you get to find Caleb University? Did you approach Caleb University, or did Caleb University approach you? I am asking that question is maybe one, his or her research might not be particularly of interest in Nigeria, but it might be an interest in Kenya. And how can they go about reaching the goals that you talked about, or reaching the universities so that they can have a platform or a mouth or a voice that they can extend their work even before they start the journey. I hope I've made myself clear. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Gertie, for that question. So did I find Caleb University, or did Caleb University find me? I would say that Caleb University found me. So remember that I mentioned that you need to be very active on social media. So I think I'm someone that I take a lot of advantage on social media. I spoke about, I've written blogs, I'm very active on LinkedIn. Anyone that wants to join me on LinkedIn. In fact, I've just started my YouTube page, which I'm quite passionate about, mentoring girls. And what drove me to being in the social media spaces, because a lot of people that behind the scene, they'll tell me that, you have so much to give back. Why can't you, showcase yourself more so that, people can take advantage and can learn from you. So, and because I have that passion to always give back, I always try to put something on social media. And right now, for anyone that cares, can, also join me on my YouTube. I'll be putting in some tidbits on how, young people can actually, run with their vision, or run with their their desire to pursue their academics further, or to pursue whatever dream that they have, despite that they have a lot of challenges. I originate from a remote area. I come from Akure. So for me to be at the global scene now, I think it's just the grace of God, and also the fact that, I think that other people that have gone ahead of me, I also learned from them. So I'm willing to give back in that light. And talking about my advice to a young person that, probably is in a remote area and wants to do a PhD, I would say, seek opportunities. And how do you seek opportunities? Go online and seek opportunities. In fact, I feel like social media is such a tool. Do you know that I would give an example? There was a time I had a short project to do on artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence is not my domain. It's not my research. I went online to learn and I was able to, to collaborate with other experts and to be able to conduct that project, to be able to deliver the project. What am I saying? The social media, internet is like a university. It is somewhere that you can leverage on. It's I have other people that talk about scholarships, for example. Within my Commonwealth network, there are people that do YouTube, that have YouTube channels on scholarships. I have a YouTube channel on young, just kind of just encouraging young people to you know to kind of maximize their potential, especially in terms of the academics and in terms of just getting forward in life. So you can follow me on my social media. This is me advertising my social media handles. Follow me on my social media handle, particularly my YouTube channel. So I think I've answered your question. So like for me, I got the Commonwealth Scholarship by finding out online. So like there are a lot of scholarships. First of all, I need to mention that PhD study is usually funded, maybe partially funded or fully funded. For me, I think I got lucky to be fully funded. PhD scholarships are usually fully funded. And let me tell you, I was not in the university. I was not an academia. Now how I got the scholarship. So you don't necessarily have to be in academia to get scholarships to study your PhD. I think that's one thing I need to let you know. And connect with me if you have any questions. I have connect with me. I can, see how I can guide you if you feel like you're stuck. I'm always willing to. One of my major drives is to promote Africa everywhere I go to, and to encourage Africans, to develop Africa. I think that's one of my drives. Everyone around me knows this, despite that I'm not in Africa right now, but everyone around me knows this. And I just want to encourage that, if you can get in touch with me, I'll definitely support you. Yes.
Okay, I think you've answered that question quite well. So I would bring up Professor Oluwole Alagbe for his question.
I think he's muted.
Okay, Esther Adebayo, can you ask your question?
I'm here now.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Togo. And I want to join others in appreciating Dr. Olamide Esho.
Thank you, sir.
She held me spellbound all throughout the presentation with her soothing voice.
Thank you.
Now, I'm not sure whether it's a question I have or just a contribution, but based on my own experience in the academics, I want to say that Africans generally, we are not lazy when it comes to researches. But I think the missing gap or the missing link has been that most of us who get into research, just like you mentioned, we do it for self-development most of the time. You are in the academics, you need to publish to get promoted, and
yes,
that's what most of us are fixated on. I've also observed that most of the time, there's this disconnect between the ivory towers and the industry. And that is why most of our research findings end up on our shelves rather than making impactful contribution to the society, and then to policy making as well. There is a geographical issue that I think is associated with this. Nigeria, for instance, no matter how bright or brilliant your ideas are, getting the buy-ins of the policymakers, just like you mentioned, can be very difficult. If they don't see something in it for themselves, then pushing through with your own proposal becomes very difficult with them. So I think an area where I would want you to perhaps shed more light is on how to get the buy-ins, thinking about our own environment, because we have everything about us is just peculiar. So how do you think, since you are a little bit familiar with Nigeria, how do you think you can get the buy-in of some of our policy makers to be able to at least use our research findings to improve policy making in the country? So that would be my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Oluwole. Thank you for that kind remark and for your contribution. Your question, I mean, it sits home really. I mean, it's because I experienced it firsthand. And I would say that the truth is that I get more enthusiasm from policymakers that are in other African countries than I have gotten from my own country. I mean, it's a sad reality, but that's exactly what happened to me, and I'm sure that every other person can relate. But I think that you mentioned something really critical, which I think is quite interesting, that they want what is in it for them. In fact, this is what makes you as a researcher to be able to get into the policy space. That is one skill you need to learn. Make sure that the way you present your research, like we have this, when we are doing research, we are so invested in it that, oh, this is so good and all that. But if the person you're presenting to, or you're trying to get a buy-in, does not see the relevance to his own agenda, then it will probably not fly. And that is a critical skill that I feel like, every researcher should learn. There is what is called the ask and the give in policy brief development. So in the ask and the give, the ask and the give concept in policy, I'll just talk about policy brief now. I'll use that as an example, is to be able to make sure that you identify, you kind of speak in a language that would resonate with policymakers. Now, we know that policymakers in Nigeria, they are thinking of the naira, or how much would this cost the government? How much impact would it make? Based on that, you now need to do your economic analysis and ensure that you project that to them to ensure that this would be a benefit for you. Not necessarily that. I think most politicians, they don't really care about saving the world. This is not even about Nigeria alone. I think most policymakers, they are not really bothered about saving the world. I think researchers are more bothered about saving the world than policymakers. What policymakers are really looking out for is that they already have an agenda before coming in. Now, it's the major work that you as a researcher need to do is to find that agenda and play on it, and play on that agenda. How would your research promote the agenda? That's that skill that we need to learn. How our research will promote the agenda. In Nigeria, we know that most of the agenda has to relate with money. So you make sure that even in your research, do some economic analysis. I think I don't know if it's like that in Nigeria, but in the UK, like if you're doing research, doing an economic analysis, it actually boosts your research. Like for me, I just didn't present it here, but I did some economic analysis, and it was based on that economic analysis that I think an organization in Tanzania was like, oh, we want to do this. Can you give us the cost? So like, I think that this is one strategy. Another strategy is to start networking. People and this happens all over the world. It's not only in Nigeria. Lobbying is part of what we should learn as researchers. Being able to lobby, being able to communicate, being able to, be in the space where policymakers are and they see you, because they would only trust people they know. And in Nigeria, it's more, how do I put it? It's even more critical. It's like who knows who. In Nigeria, it's like who knows who. So nobody really cares about what you know in Nigeria. It is who you know. So I feel like it is one thing for us to make sure that we continually be in those spaces. And I would encourage university, because young researchers, they don't have this funding, or they don't have finances to be in those spaces. I think that universities should now begin to think about how they can send representatives to maybe if there are things that are happening at the National Assembly and is open to the public, and just encourage your staff to be part of committees in those spaces where policies are being decided. Because if we are out of there, we would not make the changes. I know in Nigeria, we have a long way to go. That's true. But that's why we're having this conversation. So these are like my tidbits and based on my own experience, that I would say that can help. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that. You really did justice to that question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll call up Esther Adebayo quickly. before we move to the next agenda on the program. Esther Adebayo, your question, please.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dr. Shogo. Good evening, Dr. Olamide. Thank
Good
you
evening.
for the amazing presentation. I
Thank you.
didn't start from the beginning, but from where I joined, I really gleaned a lot. And some of the questions I wanted to ask, I think Dr. Alagbe, if I'm correct, already talked about, that gap between application of what we research, being beyond self-development. For me, I just want to, I don't know if it's a contribution, but I want to buttress a point that you talked about lobbying and networking correctly. I think I just want to buttress that point. I was in a space in a breakout section when an architect was talking about how they want to make engineers to lead the construction sector, for instance, and it took someone who was in the Senate, who was an architect, to be able to really stick his neck and say, no, architects are always the lead of the construction projects at any point in time, and somehow that bill was not passed. So it's just because he was in the right position to influence that policy. And so that person was actually talking about how we should be more involved, even in politics. That's back here in Nigeria. So I just wanted to buttress that, like, it took someone being in the right place at that point to have stopped that bill from being passed. And I think for me, that's one of the things we can do when we are in the right position of authority. So, but in this case, you mentioned the fact that that we do not even have to be in academia to be able to do the PhD. So I think, I don't know, I saw your first welcome to my YouTube channel when you released it back then. I didn't even know you were going to be, speaking on a topic like this. I had watched it, I think maybe last week or thereabout, last 3 days or something. That was when I watched it. So I would just
Thank you.
want you to do maybe an exposition on that, because for all we care, in fact, most of us, particularly me, I would think, oh, do you need to be maybe one needs to be in academia to actually pursue a PhD. I remember when I finished my master's in Unilag then, and I said, oh, I want to do a PhD. Some of the questions in my mind is, but I'm not going to be in academia. I know that already. So why do I want to pursue it? And so that's how I left it over 8 years ago. I just didn't pursue it. So maybe with the right information, one will be able to. So please do a video on that and how people who are not going to be in academia that want to pursue the PhD can actually contribute to change in the society without necessarily using that PhD in an academic space. That's what I would like to request. Thank you very much. Please drop a link of your YouTube channel so that more people can join. I already saw the LinkedIn already and
All
sent
right.
a
Thank
message.
you.
I will appreciate Dr. Shogo as well. Thank you for putting this together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Lam, did you want to react to that?
Yeah, let me
Okay,
react to
quickly.
it. Yeah, thank you very much, Esther. I'm elated that someone actually watched my YouTube introductory channel, and I would attend to your request. I would attend to your request and do a video on that. And I like the fact that you said be at the right space at the right time. I think I just want to mention that one way to do it for me, I'm quite proactive. I remember when I first got to University of Nottingham, I approached my head of department to say, you know what, I want to be the research group rep. And I became the research group rep. I moved to being the faculty rep. Now, one of the advantages that I had being a faculty rep was the fact that I got to a meeting of the faculty reps one day, and they voted me in to represent the students at the Senate. And that's how I got into the Senate, the University Senate, for a year. Now, at the University Senate, I think it was during COVID, there were some policies that they wanted to pass, which, for GDPR purposes, I wouldn't say too much about that. But because we were at the right place at the right time, we were able to speak out to say, this does not work. We can't allow this to happen. And what I'm saying is that be proactive. I think that as researchers, as Professor Oluwole rightly said, we are so fixated on our own, which I know it's understandable because of course we need to put food on the table, but we also need to think about the entire society, to think about the holistic society and just be proactive, be at the right place at the right time. And I want to encourage Caleb University to start, sponsoring your staff, start sponsoring students into those spaces, even along with their studies. And that will really go a long way. If you take that cue, I'm sure other universities too will take the cue. Thank you so much, Esther. I would attend to your request on my YouTube channel. And I'll put my YouTube link now. Let me put that on there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And just to encourage Esther as well, when I did my PhD, we have about 8 external students, amongst us that are not even in the academia. We have staffs from the Ministry of Physical Planning. We have staffs from Transport Ministry, like that. We also have people that are in the private practice. In fact, when we did our graduation, one of us was the NIA chapter chair for Ikorodu. He graduated with us, And so this is just to encourage you that you don't necessarily have to be in the academics or have a plan to be there to pursue a PhD. It's a knowledge addition, which of course would go a long way in affecting your, whatever endeavors you want to go into. So if you're in Lagos, you might want to consider Caleb University. It's a very interesting place to be to pursue your PhD. The resources are there, and of course, the lecturers are on ground to give the full support necessary to guide you adequately to starting and completing at the right time, the shortest time possible, definitely. So thank you so much for that. I think we're done with question and answer. This is the period to take a group photograph. I would implore everyone to quickly put on their video, just so we can take a group photograph very briefly. If you are in a location where you can do that, if it's not too noisy, just on your camera, and then I do a quick group photograph here, just to have a record of this webinar. Okay, so I'd wait for a few more seconds for everyone. Okay, I can see people doing that already. Thank you so much for that. After the group photograph, we'll take the vote of thanks, which will be anchored by Professor Oluwole Alagbe. Vote of thanks and the presentation of certificates of appreciation to our guest speaker. Okay, so I would just do the photograph right away. Okay. Okay, fantastic. A few people couldn't get their picture up. I think it's fine. We have a lot of people that are on with their picture. So that's great. Thank you so much for everybody coming around. We have 47 participants, which is quite encouraging. And so I will appreciate everyone for coming on board. So vote of thanks, Professor Oluwole Alagbe. I would, okay, so we'll do the e-copy presentation of the certificate, and then later I would see how we'll get the certificate across to her. So Professor Alagbe, vote of thanks. Let me.
All right. How do you thank?
Yeah, I'm trying to.
An award-winning personality. Immediately I checked on a LinkedIn profile, and I saw there a sustainable energy technology researcher and an award-winning personality. And I think it was Getty that was asking, how did Caleb University get her? And that actually confirmed the fact that, yes, we have a truly award-winning personality with us. Dr. Olamide Esho, we appreciate you, and I'm sure that I'll be speaking the mind of all the participants on this meeting this evening, that your presentation was very, very insightful. It was very educative, very stimulating, and I will say that there was no dull moment at all. I was captivated by your delivery, and I learned a lot from this. And one of the things I learned is that we are all game changers in whatever that we do. You have encouraged us this evening that in whatever that we do, we should learn to communicate properly. And that I learned from you this evening. And so for your time that you have shared with us this evening, bringing us this wonderful, insightful presentation, we appreciate you. And on behalf of everybody, I'll be making this certificate of appreciation to you. The certificate is in appreciation of Dr. Olamide Esho, in recognition of your valuable contribution as a guest speaker during this webinar titled Bridging the Gap Between Academic Research and Policy, a Panacea for Sustainable Development and Change in Africa. Dr. Olamide, we appreciate you, and I'm presenting this certificate to you virtually, and the hard copy of it, I'm sure Dr. Shogo will find a way of sending it across to you, but we appreciate you and we look forward to more collaboration with you. I have asked for a connection with you on your LinkedIn profile, and I know that quite a number of our students will be doing that as well. The School of Architecture in Caleb University is open for everyone who is interested. We have a rich resource persons around who can help, and we are also seeking for collaboration from as many parties as we can get. And so we want to trust that we'll be able to take this partnership beyond this presentation this evening, and look forward to more positive partnership that can add to the development in our own nation. Thank you very much, and we appreciate you once again for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Oluwole Alagbe. Professor Alagbe is the Dean of the College of Environmental Sciences and Management. Just about 2 weeks ago, he did his inaugural lecture at Caleb University, and it was a very interesting gathering. So we appreciate you once again, Prof. Thank you so much for your presence in this meeting. And so this is to say thank you also to everybody that has taken time out of their busy schedule to join this webinar. We appreciate you all. Thanks for joining. And of course, you'll be hearing from us also during our next webinar. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Have a great evening, and compliments of the season to everybody in advance. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
sir.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.